Many of the homeboys' mothers had to prostitute themselves. Indirectly young, having sugar daddies. Many of the young homeboys don't never know who their fathers are because the mothers in multiple relationships surviving to pay the bills, to keep the lights on, to pay the rent. So imagine when a young boy sees multiple men coming out of his mother's bedroom, or a young girl who sees different men coming out of her mother's bedroom. And we ask ourselves why our young girls are promiscuous and having children at the age of 12, 13 to 14 years of age. Do we ask ourselves why our young boys out here hustling and criminalizing themselves out there in the community? It's because we look for a way to help our mom. And that was the birth of my criminal. Is that I wanted to help my mother. I wanted the double-door refrigerator. I wanted the house on the hill with the white picket fence. I wanted my mother to have that Maytag washing machine and dryer. You know, the ones from Sears and Roebuck back in the days. Imagine growing up not having choices for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Imagine never having a fruit bowl in the middle of the table. Imagine no one ever telling you was smart. Imagine your father never teaching you how to clean yourself, tie your shoes, how to swim, how to be respectful. Imagine having parents who don't teach character and integrity growing up. So now today, I directly link, my criminal background to values. Because if you don't have values, you don't value yourself, you don't value family, you don't value your community. So in the early 1980s, crack cocaine was introduced to black and brown communities all across this country. Myself, my homeboys back in the neighborhood in Southeast San Diego and Los Angeles, we had no passports. We never been across the border. We didn't have the intellect to come up with a formula to create a cheaper version of cocaine called rock cocaine that deviated from powder cocaine. Then we look at the rise of hip hop, the urban fashion market, music, rap, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Dooney & Burke, the diamond industry. And today we're faced with 2.3 million men and women in American prisons and jails all across this country. $182 billion industry. Hip hop was born out of that era. We made a lot of money at the expense of people that looked like us. We bought the Mercedes-Benz, the jewelry, real estate. We traveled, the fashion industry, the nail industry, the hair salons, all the styles that you see in the urban community that's a multi-billion-dollar industry was born during the 1980s. But when I was on the streets, I never used drugs in my life. I've never been intoxicated, never drank alcohol, smoked marijuana. My addiction was American dream. My addiction was a house on the hill with a white picket fence. I learned early on the science behind making the sale. I understood marketing and branding on the street. I was able to corner the crack cocaine market in Southeast San Diego. But I didn't understand those business terminologies. I didn't understand those business traits. Talk about managing diversity and a diverse workforce. I've managed guys on the street who were killers, who were gang members, who were violent people. Again, a part of my life that I'm not proud of. I've never been involved in any violence in my life. I never had a fight when I was on the street. I understood all the subcultures in the community. I dealt with Latinos, I dealt with white guys, I dealt with different black gang members and things of that nature. But I didn't understand the significance of that until I got indicted and went to prison in 1988, where I was rescued from the streets. Next slide. During this period, when I was in prison, it was the darkest moment of my life. I knew that one day that I would go to prison. I just didn't know when, I just didn't know how. And it was in prison, and sometimes during the darkest period of our life, whether it's organization, your company, or personally, during that dark moment is sometimes when you have that epiphany. And I had an epiphany when I was in prison. My first couple of years, I blamed everyone for my shortcomings. I rebelled. I blamed the system. I blamed the man. I blamed my mother. I blamed my father. Everyone but myself. But it was in prison when I became culturally conscious, where men gave me a book called Black Men, Obsolete, Single, and Dangerous. As I began to read this book for the first time in my life, I read about men who looked like me, walked like me, talked like me, who came from my community that were intellectuals, that were businessmen, that were leaders, that were builders, who were highly educated. And I felt cheated. I felt like I got punked in school. I'm like, how come nobody ever put a person in front of me, a man, that wasn't a criminal? So I took the lead from the men in my community that weren't. The first time a black man ever put his hands on my shoulder and called me son was in prison. The first time I was told that I was smart, I was in prison. The first book I ever read in my life was in prison. So during this period of learning who I was, it helped me stand up strong. It helped me begin to have hope and to believe and to see that I was worthy of changing. I was worthy of living. And I was 23 years old. I was a young adult going into prison. But it became like that adult time out. It's like I never got arrested. I got rescued from the streets. And as I began to learn, I went to school, I earned my GED. It took me 3.5 years. And I learned to navigate the prison yards. And the most interesting group of men that was in prison was the Wall Street boys. I was in federal prison during the time it was called Club Fed. I was in prison with Michael Milken and Ivan Boesky. Ivan Boesky was in Terminal Island Federal Prison. Michael Milken was up northern in Pleasanton. They were co-defendants. Talk about the C-suites. I was, yes. These were white dudes. Hedge fund traders, Wall Street cheaters, multi-millionaires. But one thing the federal government couldn't take from these men was their intellect, their intelligence, and their gift. And so these guys taught business classes and marketing classes in prison, public relations. They had a Toastmasters in prison, where I eventually became the sergeant of arms. We had a think tank in prison where every Sunday we brought the brightest minds in the prison yard into the law library, and we threw a topic of race, religion, or politics. I learned the art of argument and debate without wanting to fight, because I got mad because someone may have said something that I particularly didn't like. Cultural intelligence I became in prison, because the first time I ever sat at a table with a white guy and had a meal was in prison. The first African, the first Jewish guy, Muslim, guy from Iceland, South America, Italian guys that I ever met in my life was in prison. And I realized one thing after a period of time, that no matter who you are, where you come from, man or woman in the C-suites, in the hood, and in prison, we all put our pants on one way, one leg at a time. And if you have values and you build character and integrity and you discover your gift, the American dream is possible. And it was in prison where I discovered my gift. And I always believe that if you play to your greatest strengths and you discover your gift, you become a subject matter expert in the gift that God gave you, which is the one thing that you do extremely well at a very high level, is the gift. And that separates the have from the have-nots. In prison, I learned to write. In prison, I learned to cook. In prison, I learned to speak. And those are my 3 revenue streams today. And unfortunately, I had to go to prison. That was my journey. So the entrepreneur, the streetpreneur that I was on the street selling drugs and stolen bicycles and cars and things in my former life, it was in prison when the Wall Street guy who I became friends with, who introduced me to 60 Minutes and 2020 Primetime Live, who put the Wall Street Journal, USA Today in my hands every single day, where I was able to take flight from prison and expose myself to the world to begin to understand politics, government, society, the haves and the have-nots, what makes people successful, what makes people continue in generational poverty. And my Wall Street buddy said, Jeff, he said, you're a smart guy. He says, all you gotta do is change the product. And the product was me. I understood marketing, understood branding, understood business. He said, you have the same business traits that any of us white dudes up here have. We just had a different product, and we conducted business a little bit different. So as I got into food service, I got fired on my job in the Cadillac crew. So all the Wall Street guys worked on this Cadillac crew, but only had to sweep trash up on the yard for 20 minutes a day. So they had a little broom here. It was me, Rosario Gambino, Ivan Boesky, and a bunch of other big wigs. And I used to ear hustle these guys every day. But they became really cool with me because eventually I became the head inmate cook. And as a head inmate cook, I had access to ingredients that nobody else had on the prison yard. So I had access to red onions, hard-boiled eggs, and I used to buy the Dorito chips from the commissary and crush them in white socks to create my own seasoning with Doritos dust, jalapeno flavored cheese, and yeah. And then I used to cook these, top ramen noodle dishes with squeezed cheese and add these ingredients that I used to take out of the kitchen. And I had a sell catering business because these Wall Street guys were very elitist. They didn't want to wait in line with 1,200 other convicts to get into the commissary. So there's that entrepreneurial spirit still going. And then one day my caseworker gave me this article about the top black chefs in the country. At the time it was Patrick Clark, Marcus Samuelson, and Robert Gatsby. And I began to read, I was like, man, I didn't know brothers cooked Mediterranean and fine French cuisine, because I knew nothing about a chef. I knew nothing about running restaurants, but I managed lifers and killers and bank robbers and frauders and cheaters and money launderers in a massive prison kitchen. And I learned early on how to build loyalty in the workplace. And I had a technique I used called the fist bump praise technique. So if I needed a gangster dude or some big Italian guy, I was a little skinny guy in prison, right? If I needed him to do something for me, I always started off with a pat on the back. Wow, that's a great dish. The flavor is really good. But you know what? If you tweak it a little bit here, cut back on the salt, everybody's gonna love it. So that opened the door for me to give him constructive criticism based on what I got from my supervisor, the prison guard, on the changes we had to make in a dish. So when you become culturally intelligent, you understand the sensitivity aspects of various cultures of people, things to say that are offensive, that may not be offensive. You figure out an approach on how to, get someone to do what you need to do. So everybody said, Jeff, you ought to be a chef when you get out of prison. I said, I have to look that up and see what that is. I had to do something. I wasn't going back to selling drugs because I had, changed my lifestyle, and I said that I would never, ever, commit crimes or do drugs again. And got out of prison in 1996 and made my way to Beverly Hills. And one of the chefs, Robert Gatsby, gave me a job washing dishes at 672 Bushel La Brea. And I was the first in, last out, and I pretty much mimicked him. This guy was British. He was very corporate, he was very polished. He understood wines, global cuisine. He had a sushi bar, he did California French cuisine. And I knew in order to be a successful chef, I had to look like one, talk like one, and walk like one. Just like one of my strategic ways I became successful on the street, a multi-millionaire drug dealer at 19. Again, it's not a part of my life that I'm proud of, but it was those business traits that I decriminalized. And then took those skill sets into the corporate food world that allowed me to become successful. So when I was on the street, I studied the strengths and weaknesses of all the successful drug dealers. I was an analyst. So I always dressed a part that where I didn't come off offensive or like I was gonna try to rob or do anything to these guys. I just studied them. I watched how they done business. And I realized that all the drug dealers were involved with gangs. So that brings the heat on. How are the drug dealers getting killed? I don't want to get killed. So I wasn't involved with gangs because my motto is if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And there's no money attached to being violent or in the gangs. And I just wasn't that type of person. So in the food world, I studied the top chefs. So Robert Gatsby, I emulated his success. Turn next slide, please. So what I did, I clean shaved my head when I got out of prison. I invested in my grill. I started getting my hands manicured and made sure I had no hair coming out of my nose. As guys, when we started hitting 40, we started getting a little hair coming out our ears and our nose. And I wanted to work at the top restaurants and resorts in the country. Eventually, I worked at Ritz-Carlton Hotel, Bel Air, L'Ermitage, Caesar's Palace, and eventually Bellagio Hotel. And I was able to get there because I had to chameleonize my approach to get access to the top chefs in the country. So I had to make myself appear to be what was acceptable as a black man who had no culinary degree, with a prison GED, who never been to culinary school a day in my life. I had to diffuse the threat. I had to quit lifting weights when I came out of prison because, guys come out of prison, they're all buffed up top, big shoulders, back, and they got that mean mug, they have no ass and no legs. so nobody will mess with you. So I didn't have no leg, I don't have no behind anyway. That's why I got a wallet and stuff in my pocket to make it like, I got a little bit, right? So, being that homeboy from the streets and coming from poverty, being a little institutionalized, paranoid, I didn't trust people. I was always watching and observing because I've been watching my back my whole life. I had to diffuse the prison stigma, had to diffuse that hood swagger in order to get access to the guys at the top, in the corporate fruit world. So, I'm still I think I'm still pretty cool. And I changed, eyewear, switched up, got the suit now, the shoes, and, the different colored socks that these corporate guys wear. Pull my pants up. The successful dudes, bankers, CEOs, these guys who's up here, they don't sag pants. So I'm trying to figure that roadmap into the corporate world, right? So, this is how I used to always walk back in the days. Like somebody shot me in the leg. I've never been shot before. That knee just drops down automatic. That's just how we walked in the neighborhood. So I couldn't walk into the Bellagio, the Caesar's palaces of the world. I had to master that corporate swagger. Y'all want to see my corporate walk? Yes. Now y'all saw my grill, right? Because everybody at the Bellagio, the rich Carlton, all had nice grills. They had manicured hands. I started getting facials, and when you get a certain age, you start getting little bags under your eyes. So I started taking my wife's little bag cream, because I wanted to look like a brand. So my corporate walk, I had to get down. It took me a while to polish it. This is my corporate walk. And just like women who are in pursuit of the C-suite, sometimes I kind of draw a parallel between women and minorities or formerly incarcerated